On the line with us is our old buddy, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, and rdwolff.com with 2 F's is also his website, and the author most recently of Understanding Marxism. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolff. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
So over the weekend, I was reading your book, Understanding Marxism, and you did an absolutely marvelous job of explaining how basically, we started with kind of tyranny, essentially, and slavery, and how slavery then kind of morphed into feudalism, where instead of actually explicitly owning and micro-directing the individual people who were enslaved, in a feudal society, those people had, they were given some small portion of the land in order to grow their own food, so that the lords didn't have to care for them so directly. And then you took the step from there to capitalism, where the lords or the slave owners are now the executives in the companies, shall we say. And you talked about the difference between surplus labor, I believe was your phrase, and forgive me for mangling this. It's been a few days since I read it. And the one thing that, first of all, you want to just riff on that real quickly and lay that out more clearly than I did, because I'm sure I just screwed it all up.
Not at all. I'm glad to do it. You didn't screw it up. It's really a simple idea that we've had now a long period of human history early on, when things were done in tribes, in groups, in communities, in villages, which were pretty much horizontally organized, not much difference between whoever was the chief or not and everybody else. And then we had a period of more recent human history where we broke that system down into one in which there was a clear division between a minority who made all the basic decisions, economically at least, and usually politically as well, and a vast majority who had to live with them. The first of those was slavery, with the masters, a minority, controlling and dominating the majority, slaves telling them what to do and making all the decisions about the work and the products of that work. Then we went to feudalism, at least in the European sequence, where we had, again, a minority, although this time they were the feudal lords, and a majority, and this time, instead of slaves, they were the serfs. The revolutions in America and France at the end of the 18th century were supposed to bring us an era of freedom, equality, liberty, and democracy, but they didn't. What they did was bring us a change in that arrangement, but not the end of that arrangement. And so the basic idea is that the employers, a minority who make all the key decisions, what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, what to do with the output, are again in control of a majority, but they're not slaves or serfs, now they're employees. And that the name of the game is to recapture the goal of the capitalist revolution in America and France and so on, which was to get beyond these divisions. That wasn't achieved, and so the Marxist critique has always been, you've got to go further. You've got to make further changes if you're going to realize the shared objective of liberty, equality, fraternity, and democracy.
And I would add innovation to that. Because
and innovation, and innovation that is participated in by everyone in society, rather than being a specialized task of a few subordinated to the profit demands of those who direct those few.
And that's where, I look at capitalism, and as somebody who, because of capitalism, has done well with his life. I mean, I've started and built up 5 businesses and sold them off. I've retired 5 times. And I've never considered myself somebody who exploits his employees, and in fact, none of my companies have ever really made a huge profit. The money that I always made was selling them at the end. It seems that under a slavery system or a feudal system, the people who are in charge generally by virtue of birth. They were born into a wealthy family. They were born as royalty. They were born, as feudal lords. They were the children of some warlord who took over a place. And you see some of that in a capitalist system, certainly. And this is where I think that we need to change the rules of capitalism to aggressively diminish that. But with capitalism, you can become, because you have an idea and the persistence to pursue that idea, you can achieve a modicum of success. Certainly, I'm no Bill Gates, but I mean, you can achieve a modicum of success because of innovation or talent. In other words, you can rise above DNA and lineage, or whatever the phrase would be. And it seems to me like that's the thing that has produced the vibrancy of capitalist economies over the last 200 years, and all this innovation that has happened around the world. If you agree with that analysis, if you disagree with that analysis, please tell me, and tell me how and why. If you agree with that analysis, how can we reconfigure the rules of capitalism to get more of that and less of what we see with some of these large corporations where they are run like kingdoms?
Well, I guess I half agree and half disagree. Let me try to explain. Absolutely. You can probably make a good case that capitalism has more opportunities for mobility than feudalism or slavery did. But it's only a question of degree, not of kind. The history of feudalism, like the history of slavery, is filled with examples of unusual slaves or unusual serfs who, by dint of this or that talent, of an innovation, of great physical or mental skill, were able to break out of their slave status and rise up in the system, or, for example, in some slaveries, to become masters themselves. So they had their own slaves, even though they were technically the slaves of yet a larger master above them, and you had the same thing in feudalism. Mm-hmm. But again, you can give capitalism some credit for having a bit more of that mobility. But I wouldn't take that issue too far. We all know that if you are born into the Rockefeller family, your chances all the way through life are a completely different story from the chances of a person who's born into poverty, and both of those people are born through no act of their own. That's their parents who made that decision, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the reality is, yes, but we can do much better than capitalism by making the possibility of getting a good education, having the time, getting the support to break through with new ideas and new ways of doing things. If that were a much more generalized capability than what capitalism allows. I'm a graduate, I went to Harvard and Yale. I'm a kind of poster boy for elite education. But I can assure you, in those institutions, I was surrounded by a clear majority of young men, in my case, because it wasn't co-ed at the time, who were there because of their families, because of the resources of their families, not because of any special talent or desire on their own part, which they freely admitted because they were often quite unhappy in this environment because it really wasn't what they were interested in, having grown up with luxury all their lives, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas for the kids from the other side of the tracks, like me, we were all hungry to get ahead because our parents had shaped us that way. But this society is heavily shaped by its inequality, and people have to face the unpleasant fact that if you build a system that is as unequal as ours, you are basically cutting off major sources of innovation and growth because of the of people who are denied the access to all the little and large steps along the way that lead to being able to make a breakthrough.
Right. So this is, I totally agree. So what I'm trying to get to is like the sweet spot, where opportunity is available, across the. I mean, when you and I grew up, within a couple of miles of probably where either one of us grew up, there were probably quite a few people who actually owned their own businesses. The local dry cleaner, the local restaurant, the local hotel, the local pharmacy, the local the local newspaper. I mean, you fill in the blanks, right? The local gas station. These were all small businesses, and small businesses tend to be run in a far more humane fashion than giant corporations. And now they're all gone. I mean, you could fall out of a plane at 60,000 feet and land anywhere, any random place in America, and look around and see, oh, there's an Olive Garden, there's a Holiday Inn, I have no idea where the hell I am. So, returning some sense of locality of small business to America, which would be aggressively enforcing antitrust laws, and B, having a social safety net that so everybody can have education and healthcare and all those kind of things. So there's not, you don't have a desperate workforce, and then C, building incentives in the tax structure and corporation laws to have more beneficent corporations, more cooperative corporations, rather than purely hierarchical corporations. Is that a middle ground that's viable, or are you suggesting that we just full on should say no, Karl Marx was absolutely right, just wipe the whole thing, clean the table?
Well, I really do. I'm not being rhetorical here. I wish the middle ground were something that I could believe in. I mean, it is possible. We do have an antitrust division. There was a time in America at the end of the 19th century with the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act, and all of those steps which showed that there were mass political movements effective enough to get the laws passed. But the way capitalism works is they fight against all of these kinds of restrictions. If they lose that fight, which occasionally they do, okay, then the law gets passed, and then they go to work to eviscerate the law, to get it amended, to get it not enforced, and then eventually when they can pull it the final step, to get it repealed so that it doesn't have any force, and we start the whole crazy cycle again. So I'm a little bit historically skeptical of the ability to make a durable arrangement of the sort you suggest. If we could, I'd go in that direction, but because the other side has been so successful in undoing the efforts we've made, I tend to lead to the more, to end up in the more sweeping position. We really have to make a fundamental shift.